Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison, and I want to welcome you to day 3 of our special program here at Humanity Rising on the Conference of Parties, number 26, that is taking place in Glasgow as leaders of governments from around the world, major scientific institutes, and civil society gather for the next 10 days between November 1st and November 12th, to consider how the world collectively can engage in concerted action in the face of Code Red and the climate emergency in which we find ourselves, to ensure the continuity of human civilization, and more deeply, the continuity of life on Earth, against the possibility, as we'll be discussing today, of massive extinction of species, which we all as human beings need to take in, may include us if we don't take the right action in the right time at the right scale. All things are possible. And yet we find ourselves in a very constrained situation, as we all know. Our program today will be a combination of the theme of today, which is on endangered species, that's hosted by the organization Endangered. We'll be hearing a lot more about that in a few minutes. And it's in partnership, Humanity Rising, with over 400 organizations that have come together for this event. And we're live streaming over dozens, scores of partner channels. So this broadcast is going globally because the design is to generate a global conversation at this critical moment. And so we'll be hearing from people there in Glasgow as the program unfolds within the meta theme for today, which is on endangered species. So thank you all for joining. Before we jump into the program, let us just take just a minute or two in the tumult of our world to quiet ourselves and become aware of your body. Take a deep breath, close your eyes, and center your attention on your heart. Just for a moment, listen to your heartbeat in a spirit of gratitude and deep thanksgiving that you're alive. We're all alive at this most extraordinary moment in the human journey. Thank you, everyone. Now, with an open heart and a heart full of gratitude for each and every one of you who are joining our program today, I want to commence our program by showing you something that Claire has painted over the last several days in honor of this occasion. These are pictures of birds that have gone extinct over the last several years. And I think it's important as we contemplate endangered and extinct species that we have a real sense that they are not just statistics. They're souls. Every bit as intelligent and heartful and compassionate and caring in their own way, through their own energetic form, as we are. And our presence on this planet is destroying them and ripping apart the ecology. And we need to stop. And we need to gather ourselves back into a deep remembrance that we're all part of a larger ecology of relationships, of sentient beings, all of which are precious, all of which have a niche, just like us, and a role to play in a larger whole of life on Earth. So that's our theme today, which we'll be exploring over the next 2 hours. So I want to first bring in Leslie Southwick Trask, our Chief Development Officer for Ubiquity University, who's been coordinating our Global Regeneration Corps that has emerged out of Humanity Rising and is being launched in this moment of COP. She'll say a few things about the GRC. And then I want to, then she will turn it over to Tom Eddington, who is a warrior of the spirit and been on the front lines of environmental justice and deep caring for the earth for many, many years, and founded the organization that is really hosting this program today, called Endangered. So Tom will be saying a lot more about that in the company of some specialists that he and George Caponelli have gathered. George is the founder of Age Nation and is a frequent visitor on Humanity Rising. So I just want to thank Tom and George. And Leslie, I'd like to turn it over to you for just a few minutes to tell us a little bit more about the GRC, and then we'll commence our program. Thank you,
Beautiful.
Everyone.
Thanks, Jim. And man, you married well. Did you not? You're to have such a beautiful soul tracking your life with you and you with her. We celebrate Claire in this moment with 100%. Thanks, Jim. Yesterday, I talked about the GRC as a means for us to do sense making. You know, where are we in the world in terms of our challenges and projects and networks and power, skills, and how do we connect with others around the globe? Today, I'm going to talk about the Global Regeneration Corps as a collective. So we all know that Jim, mentions each morning about how Humanity Rising came into fruition through deep partnerships with 450 organizations, realizing that we needed to change the game in a significant way. And over the course of Humanity Rising, it birthed the Master in Regenerative Action, which is an unusual experiment because far as we know in all our research, it's the first of all, a Master in Regenerative Action. And the other uniqueness is that it's a coalition of over 45 organizations that come together to share their wisdom, their knowledge, their practices with our students, with our learners, with us. And I can tell you it's very interesting when we start to design and deliver in a collective. Because we know that while we can do individual effort, it is really only in the collective that we really have an impact. And so the bigger experiment then became, how can we become a collective of collectives? How can we become a movement of movements in which we can find one another in this unusual and pressing time and equip one another with the best that we know in terms of regenerating this planet? One of the things that Ed mentioned yesterday was clearly that we have to unlearn as much as we have to learn. And I've been on the front line of organizational and community change for 40 years. And I can tell you that while many of the practices that are there now, there are definitely brand new ones that are coming in every day. And where are they coming from? They're coming from Gen Z. They're coming from our youth. They're coming from the front lines of where people are unrelentingly fed up with the blah, 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 as has been stated, and are looking for the new insight. You know, some of us say, oh, our time has come. Now all these transformational techniques that we've been using in conscious leadership and such will have their day. They may, but they may shift, and they will morph and change in these coming days, coming months, coming years. We know that we learn inside of relationships, and that is what the MRA and the GRC is about building relationships. And relationships are, in fact, very tenuous. Collaborations usually last 18 months, and then they fall apart. They may morph again some years later, but there's something about the human condition of deep-seated cooperation and collaboration is as natural as we think it is challenging at the most significant levels. And so as we think of the GRC as a collective, we realize that we're going to have to use the best in class understanding of how we cooperate and collaborate together. You know, Eleanor Ostrom and her work in pro-social, she won the Nobel Peace Prize for her work in understanding human cooperation and collaboration. And we're fortunate as one of our partners to have pro-social who are teaching us the ways of how we cooperate. We are embracing Earth Regenerators who are taking us on 2-month learning journeys to understand how do we in community, not individuals, but in community, how do we regenerate this planet? And so when I talk to you about the GRC, I talk to you about how can we cooperate and collaborate at such an unprecedented level. We know that the crises are going to continue, and we know that under crises, we go to emergency action. And emergency action is usually the familiar. And the familiar is usually, we turn to those that are organized to tell us what's the familiar. And we know that the far right can do that. And we know that that is not going to necessarily be our path. And so we have a responsibility in the progressive organizations to collaborate and collect together in this unprecedented time. And we need to know and use the best of the best ways that we can understand as humans, how do we collaborate and cooperate? So you as an organization, we call out to you to come into the Global Regeneration Corps. We are not an organization. We are a call to action. We are gathering all organizations from around the world who are dedicated to regenerating this planet. And as a collective, we can design and align together the actions that we can take that will save not just our lives, but those of our future generations. So I will put into the chat the way in which you could enter as an organization. You can definitely then sign in, and your organization will become part of the hundreds of already existing amazing organizations. Bounce Beyond, Donut Economics, the Donut Action Lab. You know, we have Integral Cities, we have Regenerative Communities Network. I mean, I could go on and on, but the reality is that this is the new playground for collaboration and cooperation. The other you can do is to enter the hive, and instead of entering as an individual, enter as an organization. What you'll need is a different email address in order to register it, and see how your organization plays with other organizations as you reveal next week your hidden networks. So come in as an organization, bring your tools, bring your techniques, bring your best knowledge, and we will weave and co-create with you the offerings and the digital backpacks for our GRC members and for each other as we learn to deal in crisis in a regenerative fashion. It is my pleasure now to turn the program over to Tom. Tom, a great leader in conscious leadership, a man who has been leading the way for some time, and I'm sure has morphed and evolved more times than he can think of over the course of his career as you've been responsive to the world in which we live. Tom, thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Leslie. I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. And I'll start with introducing our amazing panelist. Dr. Laurie Marker is the founder of the Cheetah Conservation Fund. Laurie's based in Namibia and has been one of the most incredible pioneers in the world of species preservation, biodiversity, and the amazing work that she and the Cheetah Conservation Fund have done, not just in Namibia, but throughout the entire regions of the world where the cheetahs formerly inhabited. Welcome and glad you're with us, Laurie. George Campanelli, the co-founder and CEO of Age Nation. George's work over the many decades now has been focused on aging in America, but equally important, what does it mean to age? And George will be bringing a wonderful perspective on aging and endangered, because as Jim mentioned in his intro, while the primary focus is on the species that are endangered and have gone extinct on the planet, we don't want to think about it, but humanity is one of those species. And then finally, Marie-Noelle Kieser. Marie-Noelle is joining us from Brussels. Marie-Noelle is the co-founder of We Forest, an organization focused on reforesting the planet. And I've known Marie for well over a decade now and have been on her board. And what's been fun for me to watch with her and her organization is that they started very much focused on reforesting and planting trees. But as they've learned about nature and ecosystems, the organization has continued to evolve to see the role and the interplay between animals, species, and trees, and what a healthy ecosystem looked like. So when we think about endangered, we need to put it in the context of the global ecosystem. And we have about 300 gigatons of excess CO2 in the atmosphere that humanity has placed there through not only our petroleum energy, but our petroleum-based economies around the world. And we continue to add about 10 billion gigatons annually. So climate change has been getting a lot of attention in the last couple of decades. What has gotten less attention, but is starting to get, fortunately, more and more attention is endangered species. We know that there are approximately 8 million known species on the planet. And of those 8 million, about 1 million of them are at risk of becoming extinct. And so we can't just focus on climate change. It's two sides of the same coin, climate change and endangered species. And I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Marker and Marie-Noelle and George, each of you bringing your background, experience, and perspective around reforestation, biodiversity, and humanity to the conversation. I'll just add a couple of more points, and then I'd love to get into the conversation. So 75% of land has been altered on the planet by human activity. About 2/3 of all the water on the planet have been altered by human activity. And when we look at what are the biggest contributors to altering the land and the water, and where the 300 gigatons of excess CO2 in the atmosphere come from, much of it has come from extraction, obviously, but one of the biggest contributors is agriculture. And about 25% of that burden has come from agriculture and how humanity uses the land and uses the seas to feed ourselves. And the part that's particularly disappointing is that about 25% of that CO2 comes from the agriculture industry. About 71% of all the water used on the planet is for agriculture. About 25% of all the energy used is from agriculture. And yet about a third of all the food grown on the planet goes to waste. And not only is it contributing to climate change, but is contributing to the degradation of land in our seas and the loss of species. So I'd love to get into the conversation, and we can talk about the facts, we can talk about the statistics, we can go into fear about it, but I'd like to have part of our conversation focus on what are some of the solutions that are possible. And certainly moving to more nature-based solutions is one possibility. Unfortunately, only about 3% of global finance is spent on nature-based solutions, but conservation is local. And there are amazing things that are happening locally around the planet. And Dr. Marker, your work is certainly locally based. Marie Noel, the reforestation activities you're doing on the planet are very much locally based, and you're engaging the local communities. And George, so much of the work you're doing is happening on the community level. So I'd love to start with you, Dr. Marker, and Lori, if you could just talk about the Cheetah Conservation Fund and also your background and experience on biodiversity.
Thank you very much, and delighted to be able to talk and share with you today some of our experiences. So I deal with cheetahs and Cheetah Conservation Fund, and what we're trying to do is to save the species. There's less than 7,500 cheetahs left in the world, and they're found in some of the driest places there are left on Earth. Cheetahs are found in about 23 countries and 31 populations, and each one of those are very, very arid. Based here in Namibia, where much more of the research has been conducted on climate change, we've been able to track and monitor a lot about what's been going on. Part of the problem facing cheetahs are the fact that they are found outside of protected areas, and they're on primarily livestock farmlands, mainly in all these different areas. And so with that, we do deal with people and we deal with livestock. And the problems facing livestock in Africa, which is going to be hit as a continent, probably worse than most of the rest of the world because of the poverty that is here. That in Africa, over 70% of the human population is really supported by agriculture. And much of this is done without a lot of knowledge or education. And with that, you end up with a lot of degradation. And I think we've seen a lot of degradation in Africa around overgrazing of the land, lack of grasslands, which then actually comes into other problems. And I'll just give you some issues around Namibia, is that with the overgrazing of the livestock that's gone on in our arid country, we have developed a thickened thorn bush, which has taken over much of the land. And with this thickened thorn bush, it has very, very deep roots, and it is actually drinking all of our underground water, which is a form of desertification causing us greater problems. And if indeed the world hits, 2 degrees, we already are at almost 3 degrees here in Namibia. So monitoring that and what that looks like is very scary. And how you look at that around an endangered species like the cheetah, which is affected by the grasslands, which are very much affected by climate change, and then humans and their livestock. And so much of the work that we do is to try to find balance. And we do this through training programs in a program we call Future Farmers of Africa. And just to give you an idea from that, my background from America, and I've been in Namibia for over 30 years here in Africa, but I came from America and my background was as a farmer. I was an organic farmer, and so bring the livestock management into the wildlife management, which is an integrated system and things that have not been yet taught about. And when I brought forward the vision of Future Farmers of Africa, I look at Africa as being the Garden of Eden. And yet with that, in order to allow these amazing species that live on Earth with us and allow biodiversity to play its key role to keep our ecosystems healthy, we need to be gentler on the Earth, and we need to teach people how to use and raise their livestock properly so it's not affecting the rangelands, and so that we can still have wildlife and not be in such stress around living with animals like predators like the cheetah. So I guess, I'm sorry, that's kind of a holistic story that I gave you, but that's why we are so concerned about climate change as well.
Yeah, thank you, Lori. Could you talk just a bit about some of the initiatives that you've put in place, whether it's the dogs for the livestock or other things where you've been able to deal with this the cheetah livestock human interface?
Right. Well, so much of the cheetahs being killed is because they are vermin and considered predator. And this is something that happens globally with people and predators. And a lot of that still revolves around how people manage their livestock. And so it's not the predator's problem that it's eating your livestock, it's how you manage your livestock and how you manage your grasslands, your rangelands, and your wildlife. And so that integrated system is so important. We try to find tools to work with the farmers. One of those tools that has been very successful here has been the use of a livestock guarding dog, which is, we use a Turkish breed of dog called the Anatolian Shepherd or the Kangal dog. And we breed these dogs and give them to farmers, and they grow up with the farmers' livestock. We also use Mongretolians or mongrel dogs as well, and teach the concept of protecting your livestock. And the dogs are so good, they've been doing it for over 5,000 years, is they keep predators away. But that allows us to work with the farmers for them to realize how predators live on the land. And if you do have predators, you do have, again, a high amount of biodiversity, and your ecosystems are healthier. And that's really what we want, is we want to have healthier ecosystem. We want to reduce the impact of the livestock. And if you don't have as many losses, you can have less livestock, it can be healthier. And then you can have more land for wildlife as well, which then also brings in economic benefits and are more adapted to the land than the livestock is in many areas. So those are some of the training programs that we're involved in with rural communities. But also we work a lot with school children, bringing these concepts through to them as school learners, that most of them come from farming backgrounds. And with that, for them to learn things that their parents didn't know. What does the word biodiversity mean? What is a healthy ecosystem? How, as we humans, as a part of this, how do we play our role? And I believe that Africa, being a big continent and with a huge growing population and also very, very poor, is going to be, again, so extremely important to the challenges that we're facing when we deal with these climate change initiatives, because climate change is directly tied into the loss of biodiversity.
Yeah, thank you,
So
Lori.
training, education, training.
Yeah, thank you, Lori. And I'm delighted you mentioned grasslands, because when I look at some of the data and statistics that's known, so of the 300 gigatons of excess CO2 in the atmosphere, at one time the planet had about 6 trillion trees, and we're down to about 3 trillion now. And we can look at, from a climate perspective and from an endangered species perspective, what that impact has had on the planet to lose about 3 trillion trees. I mean, those are ecosystems that are gone, and the animals and species that inhabited them are at risk, if not already extinct. And so if we were to, and there's been a lot of attention placed on planting 1.2 trillion trees over the next 30 years or so, but even if we were to plant those trees, that would only sequester about 100 gigatons of the 300 excess gigatons that are burdening the atmosphere. If we were to restore our oceans, we would be able to sequester about 69 gigatons of the 300. If we were to restore the topsoil, we've lost about a half of the topsoil on the planet in the last 150 years. That could sequester about 116 of the 300 gigatons. And then the grasslands, to your point, we don't even know what the sequestering possibilities are of restoring the grasslands. That would make a huge impact, not only on the sequestering the CO2, but also make a huge impact on the ecosystems that the species need to survive. So I'd like to turn the conversation over to Marie Noel and introduce you and the work that you're doing with reforesting the planet.
If I could just jump in here, Marie, excuse me, to bring in a colleague from Glasgow who's got some time constraints. As we've been discussing, I'd like to bring in Dita Vizoso, who's a farmer, climate activist, and rewilder, actually. She's been in Glasgow. So Dita, take a few minutes and bring us up to speed as to what's happening. Then we'll return to Marie.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me well. This is a bit tricky with the technology places, but I'm really enjoying the Glaswegian hospitality. Is amazing. And answering some of the questions in the chat, the atmosphere is very, very diverse. It's like living in many worlds at the same time. I've seen people angry, happy, hopeful, despairing, everything together. And there's just a couple of videos I would like to share just to bring a bit of the excitement, if that's okay. I think they speak more than I can.
Sure.
And there's something quite interesting I found. There was this greenwash march today, and one of the things that were asked of people joining is that they wear green, and I found it quite beautiful that the police seems to join in. So I'm going to show a bit of that in a nice, strange way. So here we are. They are wearing green as well, which I did point out to a couple of them, and some found it quite funny, some not so much so. And nature was being invited in as well by some of the really engaged and amazing people that were taking part in this beautiful march.
It's on our side.
Yes, mate.
Nature wants to be respected. Nature is with us. Thank you the sun, thank you the water, thank you the earth, thank you the police. But now we have to send decision makers. It is more difficult because they don't do the job. We don't thank the lobbies.
Yeah, so it's I think the theme that I'm seeing everywhere. I was at a couple of conversations and talks today is about justice, and it's not just about nature justice. I'm about to go into the Tribunal for Nature Rights, but it's about human rights and human justice. And it was also quite heartbreaking to see the juxtaposition between the very wealthy and flamboyant side of this summit and the homeless people on the street that kind of couldn't care less about the talks. They just want to have a decent life. And I think it's crucial that we do that. So I'm really excited to be listening to the rights of nature and realizing that we are part of it, and feeling that we have the agency to solve this really enormous multi-headed crisis that we're facing. So thank you to all the panelists and to Jim for making this available to everyone.
Thank you, Dita. You've brought in the texture and the living reality of what's happening as we speak, everyone, there on the streets of Glasgow. You know, the agony and the ecstasy is really extraordinary. Thank you so much. Tom or anyone, do you want to have make any comment or ask Dita anything while she's here before she goes?
I just want to say that this is George Caponelli, that it brings, I can't even speak, it brings tears to my eyes and my heart to feel the longing that exists inside of the hearts of so many human beings, and to see that phalanx of semi-green being a barrier or a boundary that represents the resistance in many ways of humanity to the messages that need to be heard.
Yeah, thank you, George. I would just say a couple of things, Jim, and thank you. This week I've been getting email notes and having email exchanges with friends and colleagues in Glasgow who are residents in Glasgow, and they've been sharing messages of they're not hopeful, a sense that it's just going to be another gathering, and it's going to be people talking and just continuing to kick the can down the road, and they're not hopeful. They want to believe that something's going to come out of COP26, but they're not hopeful. Yesterday, I was on a Zoom call with colleagues in Namibia, in Lesotho, and India, and they raised the concern about social justice and the concerns that while 60% of the world's population is represented in the G20, that 60% contributes 80% to CO2. And their concern coming out of India, out of Lesotho, out of Namibia, is that whatever gets decided is going to be on the backs of the people who aren't contributing to the climate change, that aren't contributing to what's going on. And they had grave concerns. I guess the final point I would make is that back in 2015, when Pope Francis released the papal encyclical Laudato Si', it was the first time I was aware of anyone writing about making a connection between social justice and climate change. And he created in that document a beautiful roadmap for how we don't have to deal with climate change at the expense of the people in what here in the West we call second and third world countries. And I'm hopeful that what comes out of COP26 and the initiatives that are undertaken do recognize that interplay and interconnection between social justice and climate change.
Thank you, Tom. Any other quick comments?
Yeah, I'd like to, hi everyone, just comment on this discussion. When you shared some of the birds that went extinct, I felt that I was very emotional, and I think most of us probably went emotional at that moment. And I was thinking, if we could use those emotions to get these crowds at COP to move, if we show more what we could all lose if we don't do anything, as opposed to statistics and stuff, really touch hearts. And this is where talking about animal loss is touching people closer to talking about ocean rising or melting the snow, right? Snow caps. So I think in communicating, we could be more personal and more emotional, and then we will transform all these people.
Mm.
That would be my invitation.
Yeah, people are moved far more by their hearts than their heads. Absolutely. Absolutely. Lori, did you want to make a comment? Then we'll circle back to Marie.
Well, I do, because going to these meetings, and I just was at IUCN as well, and knowing that these meetings are where you put, policies together and everyone comes in, it's a big cheerleading, I guess, but out of it, going away and looking at action plans and seeing people do things, it's not up to them. And that's what I said, and I wish that I hadn't said it, I guess, is that, I thought somebody was going to go save the cheetah and nobody did. And so I set up a foundation to save the cheetah. And it's going to be all of us. And so there is no they. And that's the problem, I think, is that we think they will take care of it. There is no they. We are they. And unless we can find our steps, and yes, I know they're little steps, but we need to take these little steps into huge leaps. And we are going to need to do it together. We're going to have to hold hands, and we're going to have to do it faster than the speed of the cheetah. So that's what I'm just saying, is there is no they.
That's the bottom line. Absolutely. Lori, thank you so much. Well, Dita, thank you for your report from Glasgow. Very, very heart-rending in some ways, but also inspirational, everything that you're seeing there on the street. So hopefully we'll see you again tomorrow. All right, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. So Marie, let's continue on with your presentation.
So before I talk about We Forest and the NGO I created and how we work and what works and what doesn't work, I would like to go back to what something that Tom said earlier, that we know how much reforestation is needed. We know that the equivalent of the United States is the size of the forest that we need to add in order to have a significant contribution to stopping global warming. So that's huge, right? And that surface will sequester over time 2/3 of the excess carbon we have in the atmosphere. So it's huge. There's a huge potential in forestry. And the great news is forestry is not just forestry. Forestry is life. Forestry is jobs for people, dignity. It's healthy soils for healthy food. It's water. It's wildlife. It's all of that. So it's just unbelievable that we haven't done it yet. It's just unbelievable. And as Laurie's saying, is these people talk about potential, but somebody's got to do it. And so we all have to roll up our sleeves and do what we're doing. And more than that, we do what we do, but we need to help others do the same. We need thousands of equivalent NGOs like Laurie's organization, like my organization, to replicate. And that's the job that we have to do. Now that we demonstrate that it works, we need to replicate, and we don't need to do it ourselves. We don't need to become huge organizations that are bureaucratic and heavy. We need a lot of locally embedded in communities, organizations that will make a difference. And that's what I'm focusing on. But before I do that, maybe I'll explain a little bit what We Forest is. It's maybe not very clear. So We Forest is reforesting the world to stop global warming. And the approach that we've chosen, and it's actually the only approach that works, is to focus on the landscape. Because it's not about planting trees. It's about transforming an entire landscape. You look at the wildlife, you look at the people that live around there, you look at the different requirements, the different biomes, the different needs, and then you analyze that, and then you come up with a proposal. If you have farmers, then you do agroforestry, because you're not going to say, farmers, you stop working, I'm going to come and do a forest here. It's not going to fly. So that's the landscape approach. And for the last few years, it's been recognized that's the only working solution. And so the biodiversity, wildlife is fundamental. And actually we restore forests, and a big part of it is we do it with wildlife. You'll see, for example, I'm just going to take two examples. We work in Brazil and we work in Zambia, besides other regions. But for biodiversity, those are really big hotspots. And so in Brazil, in the Mata Atlântica, which not many people know. Everybody knows the Amazon. Very few people know the Mata Atlântica. It's the forest on the coast between Rio and São Paulo. It's totally degraded. It used to be like the Amazon. It's all gone. in some places you've got 3% of the forest cover left. So guess what's happened to all these animals that used to live there? The endangered birds, the endangered black lion tamarin, the jaguar, all of these animals are disappearing. Yet we know we need them because they are the ones that are dispersing the seeds. So we are entering in those areas in a vicious circle where there's no forest left. And so the animals are disappearing because they have no habitat. And then because they're disappearing, the few trees that are left are not disseminating their seeds, and there's no regeneration of the forest. So we are in a total vicious circle. So what do? We go and break that vicious circle. We plant the useful trees that the wildlife will thrive on. And then we even start measuring the return of those animals, which is fascinating. We have cam traps everywhere in Brazil, in that area, and we see animals coming back. So basically, in a nutshell, in Brazil, that's what we do. In Zambia, which is closer to where Laurie was talking, next to the Namibian border, there's a type of forest that most people in the world don't even know about. It's called Miombo woodlands. Who's ever heard of that? Nobody? Well, actually, it's huge. It goes across 11 countries. It's 3.6 million square kilometers. It's huge. It's the most extensive tropical forest cover in Africa, right? And in that landscape, those kind of landscapes, you have unique threatened species like the black rhino, the African elephant, the African hunting dog, the cheetah that you mentioned, Laurie, and even the slender-nosed crocodile. They're all going extinct. And so our focus is to reconnect all of those Miombo pieces in this entire southern part of Africa to have these animals come back. So in a nutshell, that's what we do at WeForest.
Thank you, Marie-Noelle. Wonderful to get your perspective. And you and I have talked for many years how your work and the connecting of reforestation to endangered species and taking a whole systems, a whole ecosystems approach to reforestation has positioned WeForest as a real thought leader in the reforestation space, and you're playing a critical role. So thank you. I just noticed that Georgie White has been able to join us. Welcome, Georgie.
Thank you. I'm so sorry. I got the timing wrong. I had this in my diary for 4, so I do apologize for that.
No worries. It's great that you're able to be here with us. I'd love it if you could just share a bit about your background, and then we'll go to George Capinelli.
Absolutely. Well, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I am the head of partnerships for a conservation charity called the Whitley Fund for Nature, based in the UK. And we all award grants to grassroots conservationists working in the global south. And one of our main focuses now is on nature-based solutions. So part of our continuation funding program, which is a follow-on grant from our Whitley Award program, where we re-support our winners over multiple years. We've now created an arm of that to support specifically nature-based solutions. But overall, our work is to support grassroots conservation in the global south. And my specific role for the organization is to create the partnerships that we need to bring in the funding for those grants. We've just this week awarded 1 million in grants to grassroots conservationists, many of them working on nature-based solution programs. So yeah, that's me, and I'll be here representing the Whitley Fund for Nature.
Thank you, Georgie. George, over to you. You and I have known each other for a number of years, and you've been doing extraordinary work around aging and the aging population. But many of our conversations have drifted into the work I've been doing around endangered, and you have really pushed me on the topic of humanity being endangered. And I'd love for you to talk a bit about the human population and this conversation of endangered.
Well, thank you, Tom. Also, I want to celebrate Marie and Lori and Georgie for the work that you're doing. Critical stuff, and thank Jim, who I have the pleasure of collaborating with a lot, for being willing to host this 12 days worth of COP programs and to include Endangered among it. It's fascinating to me as I was listening how, as in many instances, the disease and the cure are located in the same bodies, whether it's a virus or of mind or a virus of biology, and in this instance, I think it's particularly true about humanity, that we constitute both the disease and the cure. The disease from our hubris, from our lack of knowing, and especially for the denial of the wisdom traditions when we stepped off that path in pursuit of what we thought was our right and our superiority. The interesting thing is that as I listen to world leaders today, and as I listen to, I remember a comment that Greta made not very long ago in an interview when somebody said to her, do you think that the world and the world leaders are doing enough? And she said, well, in order to not be doing enough, they have to be doing something. And in many ways, they're not even doing that. And so I find that humanity is really clearly unmindful of the danger that is presented to itself, as well as the danger that is presented to the species that we are watching being run toward extinction. At the heart of it, I think another disease that humanity faces is this exclusive worship at the altar of the god of economics. We seem incapable of making adjustments where we would have short-term limits that we would impose on ourselves in order to experience long-term gains. I think a lot of countries experienced just a little bit of that during COVID. They were forced to turn down the economic flame in order to protect the population as a whole. And we began to see regeneration happen in small ways. The reports of water species returning to waterways that they hadn't been in, and atmospheres clearing so people in cities could see the mountains that surrounded them. I think that what I want to address is what I would call the power of one. And it's a power, I think, that we as human beings are not exercising anywhere near to the degree that we could be exercising it. We forget that we have the opportunity to vote for the well-being of the future, not just when there's an election, when we go to a ballot box and we cast our vote for Party A or Party B, but we vote every day with how we use and spend the resources that are at our disposal. I had a conversation the other day with a gentleman who I like enormously and who I normally consider to be reasonably conscious. So I mentioned the fact that people should eliminate oil and gas stocks from their investments and portfolios. And I said, do you have any idea the impact that could have on changing the policies of these companies that appear to be so incredibly committed to driving us right off the edge of the world? And he said, well, he said, I have young kids, I have a 5-year plan, and those stocks are making me a lot of money. And I said to him, I don't even want to finish this conversation with you, so let's pick it up on another day. There's the power we have in buying so many products that are made by companies that are deadly in their impact on the environment. And we have that option every day. Ultimately, we also have the option to turn off media that propagates lies, that spreads misinformation. And if we can't reach the media, we have the capacity to reach the sponsors that support those media. So when I think of the disease that humanity is impacting on the planet, on the other species, and even on ourselves, I think that there are an enormous number of things that we could do every single day to make a difference. So whether people are on the radical left or the radical right, whether they're progressives or conservatives or moderates or liberals or neutrals, or even if they're comatose, there's something that they could do every single day to make a difference at this time in our world. And I think each of us has the power of one to exercise, and we have the responsibility to do that. So I love the work that each one of you are doing. I do. I love it and I honor it. And I think, Marie, you said it, and Laurie, you talked about it, and Tom, you did as well, that it's really an issue of compassion. It's really an issue of heart that we have to pay a lot more attention to. And I think we need to find ways to communicate to people that touch the heart, because the rest of it, the conversation that takes place in these huge conferences where there are miles of lumber between the individuals that are having the conversations, when they really need to be outside, sitting on the ground with their feet in the grass and their hearts in their hands, so that we can talk about this cure that humanity has inflicted on the planet. And that's just where I am at the moment.
Thank you, George. There were a couple of points in particular I wanted to pick up on, and I really appreciate the perspective you brought to the conversation. One is the reference you had to disease. And when I look at how the human brain and how humanity is organized, we think in a very linear way. We think cause and effect. We think how to get from point A to point B. And climate change is a non-linear activity happening on the planet. And COVID-19 and the virus has introduced and made very front and center to human beings how non-linear things work. And we see exponential growth, and we've seen the exponential growth of COVID across the planet, and we've seen how people have responded to it. And it's sort of a microcosm of climate change and the loss of species, in that it's COVID-19 and climate change are both working in a very non-linear way. And it grows exponentially in a way that we can't get our head around as a species. And my hope and my concern is that COVID-19 has helped put that front and center in each of our lives. It's shown us what exponential growth looks like. It's shown us that we are all connected. It's shown us that we all need to depend upon each other And it's given us an opportunity for a wake-up call, and I'm not sure that we're actually waking up.
Tom, I'm sorry, but one other thing I wanted, when you mentioned the human mind and its linear function, you and I have talked about it, and a number of people in contemporary society are talking about this word that comes from the Algonquin tradition called Wetiko. The Cree, the Ojibwe, spoke to a particular disease of the soul and a virus of the mind that seems to rise up periodically in the history of humanity. Carl Jung called it the totalitarian virus, which certainly for the time we live in is a very appropriate thing. But the essential thing about it that I want to say is that in my exploration of it, one of the things that's discovered is that when humanity becomes infected by this disease of the soul, humanity does things that are decidedly against their own self-interest. And that's what I see happening again and again around the planet. I see people doing things that truly injure themselves, and they seem to have no awareness of it. So the slaughter and the disregard for our species that are disappearing, the terrible impact that we're having on the environment and climate change and on ourselves. So for those of you out there who have not explored Wetiko, I could not encourage you more than to find out more about it and to look at some of the things that can help humanity cure it. And one of those things is creativity. When we call forward creativity within ourselves, when we fill ourselves up with an understanding of how we translate the pain and suffering of the shadow side of humanity into constructive good, we have a chance of eliminating that disease of the soul that is attacking us at the moment. And I just wanted to add that without.
Thank you, George. Picking up on another comment you made was, and this is for you, Georgie, just recognizing the work that you are doing and the Whitley Awards that you provide every year. Could you just share a bit about how you find the award winners and the work that they're doing and how you honor and celebrate? Because I when I look at who has received awards from your organization over the years, these are all pioneers like Marie Noel and like Dr. Marker in the work that you both have been doing. And these are individuals that see a problem and step forward and say, I want to do something.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a very rigorous application program because we don't actually interview our Whitley Award finalists until they come to London to receive their award. And the application process starts, it started a month ago, and the applications are now coming to a close and we are screening those applications. We do an initial screen and that's with an external screening panel. And then in the new year, we have our judging panel who review the shortlist, and we ask individuals from WWF and other ZSL and FFI, other organizations to help us screen. And then we have our finalists, and we bring them over to London, as I said, on a normal year. And we give them their final interviews then, but we've done so much due diligence and a lot of looking into the sort of scientific rigor of the project, because that's very important to us. And then we have our awards ceremony during that week, and we give them their awards, which are worth £40,000 in project funding over 1 year. The reason why we bring them to the UK is because the Whitley Awards is not just funding, it's also a profile boost. So we have our trustee, Sir David Attenborough, and our patron, Her Royal Highness Princess Anne, who award our winners with their trophies. And this gives our winners an amazing voice when they get home, this raised profile where they have that picture in their local and national newspapers. And this really gives them a lot of community support that they didn't have already. And then, as I said, sort of a seat with policymakers. It's a sort of really big stamp of approval receiving a Whitley Award. We also give them a lot of media training during the week so that they have the sort of conservation toolkit, as it were, to communicate their project and what they're doing. So then once they've won their Whitley Award, they then enter into our network of conservationists, and they can apply, as I mentioned before, for continuation funding, which is where they scale up their projects to the next level. And that's a bigger grant. It's 100,000, 70,000 or 100,000 over 2 years. And they can apply for that on a rolling basis as and when they need it. And we will review their reapplications and then fund them if we believe in their project, which we often do. So the people who apply for Whitley Awards, we get between 100 and 150 applications a year. And as I said, the application process is really intense. So it's quite a feat just to actually get through the application. It means we don't have to fly out and visit the winner, the potential finalists. Everything is done remotely, so we obviously don't use fossil fuels to move around. So then we just have this network of conservationists, over 200 conservationists working in the global south. And we also harness the relationships between them. So these Whitley Award winners are entrepreneurs. They are finding local solutions to environmental issues. They are all nationals of the countries that they are from, and they're at the heart of their communities. It couldn't get more grassroots. And we've been doing this for 28 years. We've been finding these unsung heroes of conservation and raising their profile, bringing them to the world stage and giving them the support they need to get their work done. So as I said, yes, they're all amazing conservationists. When they first win their Whitley Awards, they're usually mid-stage career. And as they go through more levels of funding with us, they become some of the most respected conservationists in the world. So yeah, those are the kind of people we support.
Yeah, thank you, Georgie. And I'd like to build off of that and come back to you, Laurie. You said previously there is no they, and little steps into huge leaps. And I'd love for you to share a bit more about two pieces. So one, what called you into doing this work? And you touched on it a little bit before, 30 years ago or just over 30 years ago when you moved to Namibia, but just if you could share both a bit more about your passion, what called you to be doing the work that you're doing and to be the world leader and the pioneer that you're recognized for, and also touch on how conservation is local and how that's contributed to the success of your work.
Yeah, very much. Well, I got called by cheetahs, I think I would say. They picked me. I started working with cheetahs back in the 70s and did a research project in Namibia, which was then Southwest Africa in the middle 1970s. And it was to actually do some groundbreaking research at that point in time. But as I ended up here in Namibia, I found out that farmers were killing cheetahs like flies. And it was like 800 to 900 cheetahs a year. And I was very concerned about that. And I wanted to know, really, were they killing them because they were eating all their livestock, or was it a perceived threat? And again, I kept, for the next 15 years, trying to get people engaged as I kept coming back and forth from America to Africa and trying to figure out what was going on throughout their range. Back in those days, we didn't know very much. People around the world would write to me. I was running a wildlife park in Oregon, and we were one of the few places in the world that actually had cheetahs. And everyone that I talked to, when I wanted to know more about cheetahs, they'd say, let us know about cheetahs, because we don't know very much about them. Although people had revered them for over 5,000 years, we had loved them to near extinction. We were losing them in the wild. They didn't breed well in captivity, and something needed to be done. And so that's really what people said to me. And that's what got what kept me going, because the more I found out about them, the more I wanted everyone in the world to know how special cheetahs are, and that we were losing them. And nobody seemed to understand or grasp it. And from that, they are a predator. They were catching livestock, but not as much as what was thought and perceived, and not as much to actually have that much killing going on. So I said 800 to 900 cheetahs a year. And in the 1980s, the farmers in Namibia alone killed over 9,000 cheetahs. And the world population today is less than 7,500 cheetahs. So, I mean, that was crucial. And so finding out why they were doing it, was it because they were killing their livestock or perceived? And everyone sees a predator and they kill it. That's a global issue. And basically, I got down on the ground with the farming community to try to find out what their problems were, what their perceptions were, what their needs were. And that's why working on the ground with the people have become the solution. So as we said, George, I think that we are the problem, but we are also the solution. And what we needed to do, what I needed to do, is to find out what their problems were, and then trying to help them adapt the way that they were living to try to develop solutions. And the solution base that I'm looking for is to allow cheetahs to live on the land, not just in a protected area, because they don't. As I said, over 80% of them throughout their range are found outside of these protected areas with these rural communities. And so that really got me into understanding more about the aspects around livestock management. And they've looked, our programs have spread not just to cheetahs, but to predators on a global basis, because we as people don't take the responsibility. Yes, they are killing my livestock, but what am I doing to protect my livestock? Am I keeping it healthy? Do I close my gates at night? I mean, very simple things. And that's why the use of the dog is so important, because the dogs basically think we as humans are really stupid. If we're going to lose our livestock, I mean, the dog says, heck no, I'm out here, I'm barking, and you as a human are, asleep someplace. And so the dogs basically, I think, fired us as humans. They've been working for 5,000 years. But these local solutions are what people have told me. Now, you're a farmer and you're not losing livestock and your neighbor is. Why? Well, because I have a calving corral for my calves. I have health, medical health that I give my livestock. And these are things that not everybody throughout this continent of Africa knows and understands. And that's why talking to them, many of the farming community have basically said, well, we don't have that knowledge. So if you could help us with some of that knowledge, we will be maybe gentler to living on the earth, and maybe we don't need so many livestock. And that's really what the goal is to share the earth with what we need, which is, sure, as livestock producers, we're going to make money on that. But coming back to that too, I started looking at is there a way, and I think Tom, we are we believe in certification. I am a very strong proponent of this, in the fact that as consumers, we can actually drive business, we can drive policy, we can drive government, and we can change. But we have to be given those opportunities. One of the aspects that we are involved in is Forest Stewardship Council certification, which if every piece of wood product was certified, and we only bought certified wood products, we would not be in the shape that we are today with having the loss of our forests to the extent that we have. And even if we plant trees, we're not just planting a ecosystem forest that's going to function. And I think we don't understand all of that when we talk just about planting trees. But certification, we've looked at even certifying beef and meat. Even though we do want to be gentler on the earth, right now, the world's not going to all become vegetarian overnight. But with that, what would certification of our meat do? It would change the world dramatically. That if people were eating meat and knowing that, perhaps it was certified as ecosystem stewardship farmers, those farmers could be highlighted as being the stewards of the earth. They could be the ones being paid to being better at this farming cycle. And then the people that weren't getting that price premium would hopefully go out of business. So we can make a difference with our economic dollars as well. And so those are many of the different programs that we've been also trying to push to try to help save this cheetah at the same time as working with local communities so that they become empowered to be the solution.
Thank you, Lori. Same questions for you, Marie-Noelle. So conservation's local, as you know. Little steps, as Lori said, into huge leaps, and there is no they. So could you share a bit more about what brought you into this work a dozen or so years ago, and some of the things that you're seeing happening at the local level?
Yeah, thank you. Indeed, what brought me into this is a passion for resolving problems first, and also a big concern about climate. So 12 years ago, I just was devastated every time I heard about the climate change and just was looking for something. And then my co-founder, Bill Liao, worked with Stephen Fry. They did a nice video to explain the role of forests, which actually I had no clue about. It's interesting, like most people back then, we didn't really know the importance of forests. We knew they were important, but not in this way for climate change. So that's what inspired me. And I took the challenge, and obviously I learned a lot, because eventually I learned that it was not about planting trees, as I think Lori said. It's about restoring the landscapes. Protecting the existing trees is as important or more important than planting new trees, because they'll take a long time to grow. What also inspired me in this work is the water cycle. And that's something that most people don't know. Like, everybody talks about carbon, and indeed, half of the biomass of a tree is sequestered carbon. As long as you protect the tree, you've got that carbon that's sequestered. So that's amazing. But very few people know, or too few people know about the water cycle, that actually you need trees in order to be able to seed clouds and to provide rain. So to feed the whole water cycle, trees are absolutely essential. And that is a very complex science. And we work with some of the scientists that are studying this. So for example, if you're cutting the trees in the Amazon in Brazil, it's affecting the rains in California. And people don't think about that. They don't know that, so they don't care that we're cutting the trees in the Amazon, but they're paying for it now because of the droughts and because of the fires in California. So it has to be looked at globally, holistically, and not just, this is my backyard and I don't care about the rest. So those kind of challenges, that's what drove me, and I've learned a lot indeed over those years. And I want now to give it back and work probably with Georgie, because I heard the contribution you're making to small grassroots organizations. And I think we, as experienced foresters, we can host some of the small guys around there, have them come to our place, learn with us, go back and replicate. I think we need together to put our brains together in a smart way and try to find solutions for so many of those small NGOs that can just replicate. Because also we have to realize there are some countries where none of us would be welcome, because there's a war, because there's terrorism, because we're foreigners, because we don't know the culture, we don't know the language. well, we have to empower the people who live there to take care of their own land. We can't expect, that we would go there and resolve their problem. They've got to do it. We need to show them the way. And so that's the coalition that I want to create with all the other foresters, with the people like Georgie that we just heard, and everybody, and obviously the people protecting cheetahs like Laurie's doing. Let's come together and do it.
Thank you, Marie Noel. George, same questions to you. Conservation's local, little steps into huge leaps, and there is no they. Talk about what inspired you to be doing the work that you're doing, and where do you see the work you're doing making a difference on the planet?
So is this me or is this George?
George. George.
Okay. Well, the first thing that's important to know about me is that I was born a troublemaker, you see. And I was also born with a deep sense of rightness or justice. So wherever in my life I have found injustice, or I have found things moving against what I think is a valuable and necessary thing, I've gotten involved. And so whether that be film and television or politics that I've unfortunately had my head and arms and legs in too often in my life, transformational education, now age-related issues, it all comes from the same thing. It comes from the fact that I believe intrinsically that I was born with a responsibility and obligation to be a human being and to do the things that I can do to make a difference. Whenever I've had the good fortune of having conversations like this with people who are deeply committed and active in a given area, I have found that beneath it there is a beating heart that has a great deal of compassion for life and the planet that we're engaged in. I also think in each of the things that I've done in my life, I've been motivated by an eternal optimism, no matter how much of a cynic I can sometimes be, and a critic of things that are going on. What drives me most is an optimism that if we are willing, each and every one of us, we can, in fact, as the principal perpetrators for the challenges that exist on the planet today, each of us as human beings can make a difference. And that's our job.
Yeah, thank you, George. And finally to you, Georgie.
Well, thinking about our Whitley Award winners, I think that there is no they. It all has to be. There's only they. There's only a community approach that will work. We can't do this individually. And although community projects and working with communities isn't going to solve our issues around the target of 1.5 or 2. It's certainly, we're not going to reach those targets without it. And it's a long haul, and we need to change our whole infrastructure on the planet. And the only way we're going to do that is for governments, countries, businesses and corporations and communities to do it together. Thinking about the COP26 going on right now, nature-based solutions and grassroots approach and a community level approach is a massive focus of this conference, as I think we all know, because we know that we're not on on target in terms of getting to those goals of 1.5. And the only way we can do that now is to revise the NDCs that the countries have put forward and incorporate this grassroots community approach, along with changing from a fossil fuel economy, etc. So I think, we really need to invest in these projects that are leading that sustainable development from a grassroots level. And we need to stop segregating biodiversity and climate change. They're two sides of the same coin. And, we really need to be speaking together. There's a biodiversity conference COP and a climate change COP. Nature is a massive part of this COP because finally people are realizing how important it is. But we really need to be advocates of that. And we really need to, the UK is supposed to be leading on this narrative of how important nature is and how important listening, empowering and involving Indigenous communities in conservation work and in climate change is absolutely imperative. So yeah, I've gone off on a bit of a tangent, but yeah, certainly, we need a holistic approach to solve this climate and environment crisis, and we all need to do it together. So yes, have I missed anything? I feel like I've only covered sort of one part of the question, but gone on.
Well, I'm going to keep you on your tangent for a second. If you could just share a bit about what called you to do this work and share a bit about your academic and life and professional background.
So I suppose, it began with me growing up on a farm and being in my garden all the time, which I think is actually a really important point to make on the grander scheme of things, is that we really need to bring natural history education and general education on nature into our curriculums in school. So that's really where my passion started. And then I initially was a marine biologist. I did a degree in biology at Imperial College, and then I spent some time in the Maldives as a marine biologist. And then I came back to the UK and I did a master's in conservation biology at UCL. And then I worked on some sustainability programs in Southeast Asia, working with local communities. I was actually working for a corporate at the time that I was working with the charitable arm of it, and so I was using funds to build relationships with the local community. We set up little farms in the schools and taught the children how we gave them each one meter patch, taught them how to grow food, and then we bought it off them, so it was kind of a win-win. And then I started moving away from my sort of classic biology side of my education, and I started working for the Whitley Fund for Nature on the sort of raising money side, raising funds, which is obviously very important, but it's been helpful to have that knowledge in conservation, because I think that's what's so important, is being able to sort of sell. I think of investing in nature as an investment, any other kind of investment, and if you have returns on that investment, and you want your returns to be very good. And I always wanted to work for WFN because it's such a streamlined approach to getting funding where it's needed in an incredibly efficient way. The impact that our relatively small grants have is huge, and there's 90 billion, I think, was quoted, that's spent on nature conservation. And only 3% of that is spent on grassroots. I mean, it's compared to say like 3 trillion or 8 trillion. I don't quote me on these figures, but they're huge. They're in the trillions are spent on fossil fuel subsidies. And then you've got just 90 billion spent on conservation. I mean, if you switch the two, you know, our problems would be a lot easier to solve. But yeah, so that's why I do it. I have a massive passion for the environment and for nature conservation. And I found that, you know, I'm able to communicate that to funders and raise quite a lot of money in order to get the money to where it's needed on the ground.
Thank you, Georgie.
Sorry for going off on my tangents.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. I'd like to pick up on a point that's been kind of a theme throughout this conversation, and it goes back to some of the opening remarks that were shared. I spent the last number of years working on a documentary film called The Third Harmony. And in the film, we have some of the leading neuroscientists, sociologists, psychologists, and others talking about humanity. And the reality is we come into this world hardwired for collaboration and cooperation. And if we look at the misappropriation of Charles Darwin's work talking about the survival of the fittest, the reality is we are hardwired for collaboration and cooperation. And so I would just invite each of you to share a bit about how, while there isn't, to Laurie's comments about there is no they, there is a we. And maybe starting with you, Laurie, where have you experienced and how have you used the hardwiring of humanity around collaboration and cooperation and making all the progress you've made over the last 30 years?
Oh, well, I do think that we are hardwired to want to collaborate. And I don't know, most animal people, we always say we don't like people necessarily. However, people, as I said, are our solution, and trying to understand each and every person that we're dealing with, whether they're adversaries or, you know, working along, you know, against or with us. And so from that, you know, how we try to put our relationships together is really about getting to know people. And I think George had the comment on, well, I was talking to a friend and yet, you know, they were looking at a 5-year investment. And yet that 5-year investment isn't going to raise his children's lifetime, because right now we need that 5-year investment to reverse how things are. And so how you actually work with people who don't see the same way you do, we need to get into their heads and then figure out if there's a way of, you know, coming up with a solution. So a win-win. It was also presented as, you know, that of creativity in how we are going about talking together on working a solution together. But it is hard to sit around a table with people who you don't get along with necessarily. However, we all have to find, I guess, a way of talking. So you need to find a commonality. Once you can find that commonality, you can then bring things that you don't agree on into a different level. And so I think we are hardwired, yes. And from that, what we have not learned are those skills, those people skills. And I think those people skills are things that we probably should be studying when we are younger, which are probably some of the most important skills that we should be learning of how to work together. And then from that, you know, I'm going to go off on a tangent too, is looking at working with our education level. I think Georgie said this as well, is the fact that we really need to bring in living sustainably on the earth, and our education systems are not set up that way. And so we need to really hit those education systems now. And I don't see that we are doing that that we really should. And so just laying out sort of where we should be collaborating and who should be doing it. I mean, I'm just amazed at just hearing, your opening remarks here and with this group, that it is true. And I often don't hear many people talking about this as well, is the fact that we could do more together as a we. And how do you find the right we who have the same kinds of ideas and thoughts to know that we can do more? And so, it sounds like we have a tribe started here of like-minded people that we could even do way more together. So yes, I believe that we are hardwired to try to collaborate, but if we get hurt, we step away. And that's why from youth, we need to learn how to work together with other people.
Thank you, Laurie. And Marie Noel, you have done an amazing job of creating the we, bringing corporate interest, bringing people on the ground, some of the indigenous communities together in creating a locally based solutions in the reforestation work that you're doing. So could you talk a bit about
Yes.
about how we're hardwired to collaborate and
Yeah.
what you've seen?
Well, totally hardwired, I would say, because if you don't collaborate, there is no landscape restoration possible. Imagine you go into an area that maybe you're not too familiar with, a geography, a new country, a new biome, where you have communities that speak local languages, where you have biodiversity that's threatened, but you don't know too much about it because you can't know everything, right? We are smart people, but we don't know all of that. And so how do we do that? If we were smart asses, sorry for my English, we would pretend we know everything. Well, we don't. And we're very candid about that. So we go around in a new landscape, say, we want to work there. Okay, who is great at conservation, at national parks? We look at peace parks, African parks, whoever. I mean, great people. And we say, okay, can we work with you guys? Because you're already in the region, you know the geography. Who is closest to the communities because they already work on some supply chains or whatever. So we really look at who is there and who can we work with. Obviously, as Laurie said, it's not always easy because you have people that have a huge ego, especially if they're NGOs. They have a very big ego, which makes it super difficult. Well, we don't have an ego. We just try to resolve the problem. So we go there, and for me, the criteria is they might not be the smartest or the most, the biggest expert, but if they have the heart in the right place and the same vision, then, and if they recognize they're coachable, they recognize their weaknesses, it's already it's perfect because we will be there to help them. We will grow them. We will, as long as they're coachable and they have the heart in the right place, then it's fine. And work with integrity, because otherwise with no integrity, there is nothing. And so we do that all the time. It is hard work. It's the hardest thing to work with people and organizations and try not to step on their toes, but still be there and help them grow. But again, when I go to a country where I meet the partners that we have, I don't talk much technique. That's what my team does. I go and to develop the relationship. I just share love. I care. I listen, and then it goes fine. Just reconnect them to the cause. That's the job.
Yeah, thank you. And how do you help the corporates that are funding much of the We Forest work? How do you bring them along? What are some of the ways that you've been able to help them reposition or rethink or understand what's going on locally?
That's a great question, Tom. We're lucky enough not to be a gigantic organization. We are, raising 10 million euros this year. So we're small. We have 60 people working for us in the world. And so the companies that work with us, they like us because we're close to them. We're close to the field. We personalize the relationship. They come with us to the visits to some of the projects, obviously the bigger ones. And so they grow this project with us. And some of the corporates have actually some skills that are useful to us because they're very good, for example, in health and safety. We have a company that is super strong in that. And to be honest, we weren't very strong in that. So when we started this new project, they came with their expertise and they were super excited to contribute in their way. So it's all about connecting to the individuals and sharing the same vision again, corporates or local communities.
Mhm.
Yeah, thank you. And George, same question to you around collaboration and cooperation.
No doubt in my mind and in my experience that we are indeed not only hardwired, but given the opportunity, anxious to collaborate and cooperate. And when I listen to Lori and to Marie, a word that comes up that's really important in that discovery is receptivity. What I hear in what Marie just said is that there was a natural receptivity to looking for the things that connected and that connect people in a project, no matter what the seeming differences are. The other thing, in all of the things that I have done, from film and television to transformational education and politics and corporate change and now age-related issues, what I've found is that experiential things are the essentials that allow people to connect. As long as we stay on the cognitive and the theoretical, it is often hard to bridge the gaps. But give people common things to do, give them common exercises to participate in, and their natural inclination to collaborate, to find solutions just emerges. And it's always beautiful in the process. And it's always much quicker than I've expected. And even when you bring up the issue of corporate funders or sponsors versus individuals and organizations that are their recipients, as Marie said, bringing people together to work together on something. There's an old Russian expression I've heard that says, if you give children something to play with and they don't cry, then everything is okay. And in some levels, if we can bring people together to give them common experiences, let them learn, let them share, what emerges is their commonality far more than their differences. And that, I think, is one of the reasons I can be optimistic about humanity's potential for surviving, is that if we would do a lot more of that and get the hell out of our heads and out of the theoretical and into the actual and the practical, we could make enormous progress in a very short period of time.
Thank you, George. Georgie, we lost you briefly. I don't know if how much of the thread you were able to follow, but the question I posed to each of you is based on this film I released last year that documents that we're hardwired as a species for collaboration and cooperation. And so I would just pose the question for you around collaboration and cooperation and how critical it is to the work that you're doing and some of the challenges that your organization may have faced.
Thank you, Tom. Apologies, the office Wi-Fi just went out for a bit. Not doing too well today. So collaboration is absolutely key. Not just between the scientists and the conservationists, but between NGOs, funders, governments, policymakers. Without collaboration, nothing happens. So yes, it's incredibly important. We as an organization collaborate with other organizations. I mentioned some before, FFI, WWF, ZSL, and we also, we work with one particular organization, well, ZSL again, and Rufford Small Grants, who fund conservationists early stage, and then we we have conversations with them about who could be potential Whitley Award winners. So we each sort of occupy a different niche and support one another. So yeah, certainly between organizations, I think it's partnerships, collaboration, make the job we're all doing just much more efficient. And it's the same with connecting with our funders and our supporters. I believe Marie touched upon it earlier. I came in just as Marie was speaking about the relationships she has with her partners, and it's exactly the same for us. We have very close relationships with all of our supporters and our partners. We're a very small team. There are only 6 of us, 5 full-time staff equivalent. And so we each have very specific roles, and my role is to look after all of the partnerships that we have at the organization. And that's wonderful, because it gives me such a close connection to all of them. I know them all very well. I know all their preferences. I know exactly how they like to be communicated with, and it also means we can, as Marie said, we can call upon our partners and supporters for their skills, not just use them as an ATM, which again, I think is really important. And it's about engaging philanthropists and foundations and partners and connecting them with what they're supporting, because I believe that gives a long-term sustainable relationship, and they get empowered as well. So I think it's at every level, collaboration is incredibly important. And obviously the biggest one is the conservationists and scientists themselves. All of the Whitley Award winners that we have, they're all entrepreneurs. They're all finding very specific local solutions to their problems. And without support and without collaboration, they can't share that knowledge. They can't get ideas from others. And so, a big part of what we do, Win a Development Program, Win a Network Development Program, where we help support those natural connections and those the support for one another within across the world. We've actually recently started accepting joint proposals. So we have, for example, one winner working in Sumatra against the Spatial Development Program there. And then we have another winner working in Russia, and they're both working with dams, stopping damming. And they're now working together, sharing ideas. And this is happening across the whole network. So yes, collaboration is key at every level.
Thank you, George. And Laurie, back to you for a moment. I mentioned early on in this conversation that colleagues I've spoken with or been in contact with in Glasgow were not feeling particularly optimistic or hopeful about what was going to come out of COP26. And the colleagues that I had a Zoom call with yesterday in Lesotho and in Namibia and in India were concerned about social justice and decisions that were going to come out of COP. And so I would just ask you, what's going to keep you going in the work that you're doing? What's going to keep you inspired? And how are you feeling about the future?
Woo, big questions there. I think the future is very scary for all of us. And I'm glad that there's some light bulb that's gone on with people maybe now. I don't know where that light bulb's been for a number of years. I always say when I left the US and moved to Namibia 30 years ago, I kind of left what I would say was the Western world. And it's been a delight to work here in Namibia with people who, although they're very rural, and we've developed policies and programs that I think are groundbreaking when it looks at people and the environment. And I would love to see more of those kinds of programs expand. And what we're trying to do is to expand them at least through the cheetah's range. And so that we could try to have some of these model programs with wildlife living in harmony with people. So what inspires me, I guess, is the fact that I have faith in people. I don't know if I have faith in large organizations. I think these policies are wonderful. And again, it's like going to a rah-rah session, and yet how many people take anything home with them and do something? I seem to be the kind of person who sees a problem and wants to come up with a solution. And so if I have to come up with the solution to change the world, to save the cheetah, which you know is our motto for the Cheetah Conservation Fund, then come hell or high water, I will, because I really like the cheetah and I really like the other animals that live on the earth with us. Just like, you know, Jim showed the pictures of the birds that are gone. I think every living animal, tree, grass, I mean, I like them. Insect, and I don't want to live on earth without them. And so I just hope that everybody I meet, I can help get onto that same feeling and to help them see that they can do things. I think everyone feels helpless, and yet we're not. But we need to have louder voices, and we have to do more, and we have to put small steps into place and big steps into place. And some of those big steps would be to have different nature-based solutions, different investing solutions, so that our dollars can go different places. And I think we as consumers, again, can become the solution to what our problems are. But we are going to have to come together. And I have said before, again, living in Namibia and being out in the middle of the bush, I'm not tied into many of the different people maybe that you all are, to have some of these bigger solutions. And yet, you know, I'm trying to go out and knock on bigger doors to let people know that we need to do a lot more in order to help save an animal like the cheetah, which is helping lead the race, unfortunately, in extinction. And I am not going to live on this earth with these animals that I care so much about gone, because they are helping us all live, and we just don't understand that. So I hope I've helped answer some of those things for you.
Yeah, thank you, Laurie. Marie Noel, same question to you. What keeps you inspired, and how are you feeling about the prospects of the future?
What keeps me inspired, because the prospect of the future, when I look at reality, I'm a scientist, it's scary, but I try to stick to having to stay inspired. And what inspires me most is the possibility of us succeeding. And for that, I'd like to share two quotes that I really love, that I've always remembered during these 12 years of work so far. One is from Nelson Mandela in 2013, where he said, "Our deepest fear is not that we are weak. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure." Sometimes we are scared of succeeding. We're scared of being big. And that's why we just have to acknowledge and overcome that. That's something I keep remembering. And the other one is from Mark Twain, who said, "They didn't know it was impossible, so they did it." So I invite you all to remember that and, you know, continue that. Yeah.
Thank you. Same question to you, George.
I don't feel that I have a choice. I sincerely believe there was a book written a number of years ago by Stephen and Andrea Levine called Healing into Life and Death. And I think we have to take the same steps, whether we're healing into life or into a transition. I think we need to take the same steps, whether we are attempting to preserve humanity and the species that reside here, or whether ultimately that will not be the result. I think the same efforts are needed. And I have also 2 quotes. Thank you, Marie, for those. One is by Peter Drucker, who says, if you want to know the future, invent it. And the second is by Bucky Fuller, who says, we're called to be the architects of the future and not its victims. So that's our, I believe with all my heart, that's our job, each human being that exists on the planet. We have those 2 choices to make, and we can make them. And if we make them with honesty and integrity, we'll do the very best we can. Whether we finally succeed or not, it'll still be a success.
Thank you, George. And finally to you, Georgie, what keeps you inspired, and how are you feeling about the future?
Well, it's easy to answer the first question, and that's our Whitley Award winners. They are just the most amazing people. They have to be in order to lead their communities in the work they're doing, and they really are the heroes of this century, and they're going to make the difference between, well, they're going to make the difference of what our future is going to be like. So if you want a sort of optimistic or just an optimistic, or there's this term conservation optimism, you can have a look on our website. I shared a link to some of the nature-based solution programs that our Whitley Award winners are conducting as we speak. And I suppose that leads me on to the second question. I have hope because the solutions are actually really simple. We might not all understand the nitty-gritty parts of what climate change is and needs, but we really do have the solutions at our fingertips. And investing in local people, it's the cheapest, most efficient way of doing that. I mean, we need to phase out a fossil fuel economy and everything like that. But in terms of nature being able to recuperate, it's not past that tipping point yet. And so there's no way that we should give up hope until it is. And then even then, I'm so sorry to mention this. It's just Laurie, you mentioned about wanting the animals to be with us, and every blade of grass and every insect, and I feel very much the same. But if we don't invest in biodiversity, without them, we're not going to be able to keep living on this planet. So, I mean, they determine our future. If we don't save biodiversity, if we don't invest in it, if we don't protect it, if we don't restore it, then that's going to be humans will not be able to use this world as a resource, because we just won't have any. So in that sense, I still have hope for the planet. I just don't have hope for humanity.
Yeah, thank you.
Tom, would you tell us how we can reach Endangered and how we can learn more about the work that you're doing?
Yeah, and I'll just share something before answering that, George. So I think about humanities, if I spread humanity's consciousness across a normal distribution curve, there's a small percentage of humans on the planet that are truly awake and understand. And each of you in the work you're doing and how you're showing up gives me immense optimism and hope for humanity, because I know it's not just each of you, but there are many others on the planet, whether they're Whitley Award winners or others, who are doing amazing work. And then there's a small percentage, maybe 5% of humanity that's truly asleep. And the vast majority of humanity, from my experience, they are pretending to be asleep. And the hardest people to wake are those pretending to be asleep. And so I want to continue to highlight and do everything I can to honor and respect and support the work that each of you are doing, and many more around the planet, so that those who are pretending to be asleep will wake up. And so I just would like to thank each of you for being with us, bringing your expertise and all that you've been doing in the world. I so admire and respect each of you, and thank you for your decades of work and contribution. George, to your question, the organization you're referring to, it's the Endangered campaign, and you can find us at endangered.global. And we're doing everything we can to recognize and celebrate organizations like the Cheetah Conservation Fund and Dr. Marker's work, and bringing funds and attention to extraordinary organizations and people who are doing the kind of work. And we're doing it, to Marina Wells' comments at the beginning of our conversation. We're doing it through fine art, we're doing it through music, we're doing it through film, because that is the way to reach people's hearts. For decades, scientists have been telling us all of the statistics, all of the facts. President Kennedy here in the US in the 1960s was the first US president to be told about climate change. Every single president since President Kennedy in the early 1960s has been told about climate change, has been told about biodiversity loss, and we've continued to kick the can down the road. And so it is through, I believe, through music, through film, through the arts, and reaching people's hearts, that will wake people up, that will affect the change that we're so desperately in need of in the world. So thank you all again as panelists, and thank you all around the world who have joined us today. And I'll turn it back over to Jim.
Thank you, Tom. What a noble group of people you are. Quite extraordinary. The passion and commitment that you've represented today. I've been just sitting here in rapt attention. When you were detailing your various quotes, I was thinking of Christiana Figueres, from Chile, who's been at the helm of the climate movement, where she said, "Impossible is just an opinion." And I think that's very salutary for us to consider in this moment. Someone said yesterday on the panel that we must hope and know that we've run out of time. And I think in some ways that's the crucible that you've brought forth to us of deep optimism, but on the anvil of diminishing time within which to make the kind of difference that, as you've all stated, the solutions have been lying around in many cases for decades. And somehow, Tom, your point is, I think, a very profound one. 5% of the sleep, and then there's another 50, 60% that pretend they're asleep. And how you wake them up and how you galvanize their caring is really a singular challenge for all of us. And I just want to say to you, Lori, I just loved hearing about the cheetahs, because when I was a boy, you'd hear about the lions and then the tigers, and these are always put forward as sort of the king of the beasts and so forth and so on. I'll never forget when I was about 8 years old, I saw this little documentary, and when I saw this cheetah racing across the plain and the grace with which that body moves, I fell in love with cheetahs. And I've had this love of cheetahs ever since. And so I just want to say, just personally, I wish you all the best, and would love to be in touch to see how we could possibly help out. But when you think of, whether it's these little birds or the cheetah, and Marie, the forest, you look at an oak tree, you look at a mango tree, you look at, any kind of tree, and you just feel deeply moved. And in fact, at our house yesterday, we had a tree whisperer, someone who can actually communicate and heal with trees. And they'd flown out from the East Coast, and they're heading up into the areas of fire here in California. And on Friday, they're going to give us a report from the devastation of the fires that have been laying waste to so much of the western and northwestern part of the United States. So, I mean, the trees are there with the cheetahs and with the birds and all the other species that we either mourn or are concerned with. So I just want to honor the trees and Georgie, the fact that you're giving away these little micro grants to these groups and that are now collaborating, and it's really from the bottom up that we're probably in the end going to solve this thing. So I just want to acknowledge everything that you're doing and hope that you can raise more and more funds to give away more and more resources to people who, because of the people that are awake, most of us are awake but desperately constrained by both the lack of caring and the lack of resources. What was the old saying? It'd be a great day when the peace movement got all the taxes and the Pentagon had to do the bake sales. It would really radically change our world. So I just want to hope for you that one day you have the resourcing you need to really get out there and spawn all those grassroots organizing movements out there who so desperately care and are constrained because they don't have enough to do the solution at scale. That's really a major part of our challenge. And, George, your passion and everything that you're doing around aging and how, the elders can mentor many of these younger activists. That's a whole other piece to this equation. So, George, thank you. George and I are working with few other people, and then right after the COP, we're going to be having the masculine dialogues. If there's a problematique in our world, it's patriarchy. Mm-hmm. It's how men have comported themselves over thousands of years now, directly responsible to the fact that we're now over the cliff. So we're following up on our program on the COP with a look at what maleness means, what masculinity needs to mean and evolve toward as we all laboriously move beyond the constraints of just patriarchy. That's another massive issue that's worth contemplating. And Tom, finally, I just want to honor your life and your professional accomplishments and the many areas that you've demonstrated deep compassion for the world. And now at this moment when we're entering in the 6th major extinction of our planetary history, to create endangered global is again, it's a noble task. And so I just want to acknowledge all your work in convening this panel and thank you very, very deeply, all of you. Now, if everybody would turn on their videos, Stan wants to take a photo for our archives because all this is archived and then distributed globally. We want to get a nice shot of everybody. And everyone's, by the way, welcome to the after chat. There's the link that's been put into the chat if you want to more informally engage in kind of this post-session dialogue. And then tomorrow, we're going to delve into another domain of health and the effect of climate change on human health. And we've all seen the effect of the pandemic on human health. The pandemic has come out of climate change. And so there's a much broader discussion that we're going to be having around human health in a time of Code Red. So that'll be tomorrow on Humanity Rising. But everyone, thank you. This has been illuminating and inspiring, and we are deeply grateful.
And Jim,
We'll
I
see
just want to add one thing.
Sure.
I'd love to see all the names of the folks on this panel inside the GRC. So I just would like you to click into globalregenerationcorps.com and you can take action, but enter your hive. You have an opportunity to complete your first responder hive and find out over the next week who in the world you're connected to by virtue of your networks, your passions, your issues that you're working on. So I just needed to make sure that we all know that this is how we're going to see after COP26, the building of the Global Regeneration Corps. Thank you.
Yeah, one of the things we're doing through the GRC, everyone, is as organizations come in, they identify different areas where some of the pods that are forming could actually work with them in some area they're concerned with to help regenerate some aspect of the ecology or just the larger human system that needs radical regeneration. So thank you for that, Leslie. Thank you all. We'll see you here again, same time, same station tomorrow for what health means in a time of Code Red. Bye for now.
Thank you all.
Thank you,
Thank you,
everyone.
Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Trying to figure out how to get to the after party. Don't know how.
Their link is in the chat for the after party.
I know, but I don't close the chat because I can't find it. Can you see it? It's someplace. Up near the top, I think. I don't know. I had it at some point and now I don't see it. You couldn't email it to me, could you?
Yes, I will do now. I will do so.
Thank you. You've
no
got my
problem.
email, right?
Yep, I think so. Yep. 1 second. Bye bye now.
Okay. Bye. Thank you then. Thanks.